When my son-in-law got pulled over for speeding, the officer checked his license and pulled me aside. "Mom, don't go home with him. Find somewhere safe." He handed me a folded paper. I opened it and found the shocking truth about who he really was. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The clinking of silverware against fine china was a sound I had grown to tolerate, though never to love. It was the soundtrack of my daughter's new life. A life of meticulously curated dinner parties, gallery openings and charity galas where the cost of the champagne could fund a small-town library for a year. I sat at a polished mahogany table in my daughter Alaya's dining room, a room that looked like it had been lifted from the pages of a design magazine. It was beautiful, I suppose, in a sterile, untouchable way, but it held none of the warmth, none of the history of the home where I had raised her. Across the table, my son-in-law Marcus Thorne was holding court. He was a man who seemed to be sculpted from charm and ambition, dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like a second skin. He was telling a story about a recent business trip to Dubai, his voice a smooth, confident baritone, his hands gesturing expansively. My daughter, a brilliant pediatrician with a heart as big as the sky, looked at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. She was completely captivated, as was the other couple at the table, friends of theirs who seemed to hang on his every word. I, on the other hand, was watching. I am always watching. My late husband, Robert, used to say I had the quietest eyes and the loudest mind of anyone he'd ever known. He was a civil engineer like me, and we had built our life and our fortune on a foundation of careful observation, meticulous planning and a deep understanding that the most critical parts of any structure are the ones you can't see. We had made our millions quietly, investing in commercial real estate in overlooked neighborhoods long before they became fashionable. We lived comfortably but simply. Our wealth a tool for security and for providing Aaliyah with every opportunity, not a prop for a performance. Marcus, however, was all performance. Everything about him was designed for maximum effect, the flashy watch on his wrist, the casual way he dropped the names of powerful people, the condescending warmth he directed at me. "Esther, you're quiet tonight," he said, turning his high-wattage smile on me. "We must be boring you with all this talk of mergers and acquisitions." Aaliyah's adoring gaze flickered to me, a silent plea in her eyes. "Please, Mom, just for tonight be impressed." I offered a small, polite smile. "Not at all, Marcus. I find it fascinating. It's a very different world from building bridges." "Exactly," he boomed, seizing the opening. "It's all about building virtual bridges now. Moving capital, not concrete. In fact, I was looking at your portfolio the other day. Aaliyah showed me the basics, and with all due respect, it's a little old-fashioned. All that tangible real estate. You're leaving a lot of money on the table. You should let me get you into some more dynamic offshore opportunities. The returns are astronomical." Aaliyah beamed, proud of her husband's supposed financial genius. The other couple nodded sagely, clearly impressed, but I heard the subtle condescension, the dismissal of my life's work as a quaint, dusty relic. I saw the flicker of something cold and appraising in his eyes as he said the word portfolio. It was the look of a wolf sizing up a sheep, and it sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the aggressively air-conditioned room. I kept my smile in place, a placid mask of maternal contentment, but beneath the surface a silent alarm had begun to ring. A few days later, the wolf came to my door. I lived in the same comfortable but unpretentious house I'd shared with Robert for 40 years, a solid brick Tudor in a quiet, leafy suburb. It was a home, not a showcase. Marcus's luxury sports car, a machine of screaming red metal and roaring engine, looked alien and vaguely obscene parked in my driveway. He was dressed more casually this time in expensive linen trousers and a polo shirt, but the aura of restless predatory energy was the same. He had come, he said, to follow up on their conversation, to show me the opportunity of a lifetime. He spread a glossy, professional-looking prospectus across my simple oak coffee table. The company was called Viridian Horizons, and it promised investors a stake in an exclusive, eco-friendly luxury resort development on a private island in the Caribbean. The brochure was filled with stunning computer-generated images of pristine beaches, infinity pools, and smiling, beautiful people. "The beauty of it, Esther," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a confidential, conspiratorial whisper, "is that it's completely insulated from domestic market fluctuations, and shall we say, excessive tax oversight. It's the way the truly wealthy protect and grow their assets." It was a thinly veiled reference to tax evasion, a test to see if I was greedy enough to take the bait. I asked a few gentle probing questions, the kinda slightly naive but curious old woman might ask. Who are the primary developers, dear? I don't see their names listed. It's a private consortium, he said smoothly, waving a dismissive hand. Anonymity is part of the appeal for the high net worth individuals involved. And the land itself, I continued, has there been a full geological survey? The Caribbean is a seismically active region. He laughed, a warm, patronizing sound. Esther, you're thinking like an engineer again. These are the best people in the world. They've thought of everything. This is a turnkey opportunity. The only thing you need to think about is how much you want to make. He then named a figure, an initial investment of $5 million, that was clearly designed to be the first of many. He left the glossy brochure on my coffee table, confident that he had planted the seed of avarice. He left me with a final charming smile, telling me he knew I'd make the smart decision. After he was gone, I stood in my quiet living room, the silence a welcome relief after his whirlwind of empty words. I picked up the prospectus. It was heavy, printed on expensive paper, but to me it felt weightless, a hollow object filled with dangerous, beautifully packaged lies. My quiet alarm was no longer just ringing, it was screaming. I knew, with a mother's painful certainty, that talking to Aaliyah would be like walking through a minefield. Her love for Marcus had become a fortress, its walls built of his charm and her own deep desire for a happy, successful life. To question him was to question her judgment, to attack the very foundation of the world she was so proudly building. I waited a few days, rehearsing the conversation in my mind, searching for the right words, the right tone. I needed to be a concerned mother, not a suspicious mother-in-law. I invited her to lunch at a quiet, old-fashioned tea room we used to frequent when she was a little girl, hoping the familiar surroundings would soften the difficult conversation to come. She arrived late, breathless, still in her scrubs, a flurry of apologies and talk about a difficult case at the pediatric hospital where she worked. She was a brilliant doctor, compassionate and dedicated, and I was immensely proud of her. It was this very goodness, this innate trust in the best of people, that made her so vulnerable to a man like Marcus. After we ordered, I gently broached the subject. "Sweetheart," I began, my voice calm and measured. "Marcus came to see me the other day. He showed me that investment opportunity, the one in the Caribbean." Aaliyah's face lit up. "Oh, the Viridian project. Isn't it amazing? He's so excited about it. He says it's going to be the next big thing." "It's certainly ambitious," I agreed, choosing my words with the care of a bomb disposal expert. "It's just, when I was looking through the prospectus, I had a few questions. As an engineer, you know, I always look for the details, and it seemed a little light on the specifics, the real nuts and bolts of the project." The light in Aaliyah's eyes dimmed, replaced by a familiar defensive tension. Her posture straight. "Mom, it's a private investment prospectus, not a public works contract. It's for investors, not engineers. Marcus said it's all standard for this level of finance." "I know, dear," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle. "It's only that a $5 million investment is a significant amount of money, and I couldn't even find the names of the primary developers or any concrete permits. It just made me a little uneasy. I would hate for him, for both of you, to get involved in something that isn't completely solid." That was when the walls of her fortress went up. Her face, which was usually so open and warm, became a cool, distant mask. "So you're saying you don't trust Marcus's judgment?" she said, her voice flat. "You think he doesn't know what he's doing?" "No, that's not what I'm saying at all," I replied, though in my heart that was exactly what I was saying. "I'm just suggesting a little more due diligence. It's what your father and I always did. We never invested in anything until we had walked the land and kicked the tires, so to speak." "Well, this isn't kicking tires, Mom," she snapped, her voice rising, drawing a glance from the next table. "This is the big leagues. This is how wealth is created now, through vision and decisive action, not by kicking tires in the dirt. You've never liked him, have you? You've always been suspicious of him just because he's not a quiet, boring engineer like Dad was. You can't stand to see me happy with someone who is ambitious and successful in a way you don't understand." The accusation, so unfair and so deeply painful, struck me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had spent my life trying to build a world of safety and security for her, and now she was accusing me of trying to tear her new world down out of jealousy. I saw Marcus's work in her words, the subtle poisoning of her mind against my old-fashioned ways. The conversation was over before it had truly begun. She paid the bill, her movements sharp and angry, and left me there, sitting alone in the quiet tea room, with a broken heart and a cold, terrible resolve. I could not save her with words. I would have to save her with facts. The next morning, I made a phone call I hadn't made in years. The man who answered was named Arthur Vance, a retired police detective who now ran a high-end private investigation firm that specialized in financial and corporate intelligence. Arthur was discreet, methodical, and possessed a bloodhound's instinct for sniffing out lies. My husband and I had used his services a few times over the years to vet potential business partners, and his work had always been impeccable. "Esther," his gravelly voice said, a note of pleasant surprise in it. "It's been a long time. I trust you're keeping well." "As well as can be, Arthur," I said. "I have a job for you. It requires the utmost discretion. No one can know you are working for me, especially not my family." "That's my specialty," he said. "What are we looking at?" I didn't give him Marcus's name. To do so would be to admit even to myself the true target of my investigation. It felt like a betrayal I wasn't yet ready to commit. Instead, I focused on the business. "I've been approached with an investment opportunity," I explained. "An offshore real estate development called Viridian Horizons. The prospectus is professionally done, but it's thin on verifiable details. I want you to do a deep dive. I want to know who is really behind it. I want to know about the holding companies, the registered agents, the primary developers. I want to know if it's a legitimate enterprise or if it's just a beautiful lie printed on expensive paper." "I understand," he said, a note of professional interest in his voice. "You're not asking me to find a crime. You're asking me to find the truth, whatever that may be." "Exactly," I confirmed. "I need impartial, undeniable facts. And I need them as soon as possible." "I'll get right on it, Esther," he said. "You'll have a preliminary report by the end of the week." Hanging up the phone, I felt a small measure of control return to my chaotic emotional world. I was no longer just a worried mother, helpless against my daughter's willful blindness. I was Esther Davenport, a woman who had built an empire on a foundation of facts and figures, and I was about to bring the full weight of my resources to bear on the polished, deceptive world of Marcus Thorne. The conversation with Aaliyah had created a painful rift between us, a cold silence that stretched for weeks. But in that silence I was not idle. I was gathering my army, sharpening my sword, and preparing for a battle that I now knew was inevitable. I prayed that I was wrong, that Arthur Vance would come back with a report showing a legitimate if aggressive investment opportunity. But in my heart, in the place where a mother's intuition lives, I knew that the truth, when it came, would be far darker than I could have imagined. The preliminary report from Arthur Vance arrived, not as a phone call but as an encrypted email with a password-protected attachment. It was a sign of the seriousness of his findings. I opened it in the quiet sanctuary of my home office, the same room where Robert and I had planned our future, and where I now seemed to be fighting to protect my daughters. The report was not an accusation. It was a clinical, dispassionate dissection of a lie. Arthur, with his typical methodical brilliance, had unraveled the beautiful facade of Viridian Horizons and exposed the hollow, rotten structure beneath. The company itself, he confirmed, was a ghost. It existed only on paper, a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, a jurisdiction notorious for its corporate secrecy and lax financial regulations. The address listed was nothing more than a post office box in a small, nondescript building that housed thousands of similar phantom companies. It had no employees, no physical office, no history. It was a legal fiction, created for the sole purpose of hiding the identities of the people behind it. Deeper in the report, Arthur detailed his attempts to trace the ownership. It was, he wrote, like peeling an onion made of smoke. The Cayman Company was owned by another holding company in Panama, which was in turn owned by a trust in Liechtenstein. It was a deliberate labyrinthine structure designed to make tracing the flow of money and identifying the ultimate beneficiaries a near impossible task. While he hadn't found a direct provable link to Marcus Thorne, the pattern was damning. This was not the structure of a legitimate real estate development. This was the architecture of a sophisticated fraud. The most chilling part of the report was the final section titled Professional Assessment. Arthur wrote, "Esther, while I cannot, at this stage, point to a specific prosecutable crime, I can tell you with a high degree of certainty what this is. The corporate structure is a classic hallmark of a large-scale money laundering operation, or a Ponzi scheme. The impossibly high promised returns, the lack of transparency, the use of multiple offshore jurisdictions, these are all giant red flags. My professional advice as your consultant and your friend is to stay as far away from this as possible. Do not invest a single penny, and I would be very, very wary of the person who brought this to you. I read the final line 3 times, the words blurring slightly. Be very, very wary of the person who brought this to you. The report was my proof. My intuition had not been wrong. Marcus was not just a flashy, distasteful man with questionable business ethics. He was a predator, and he had been trying to lure me into a carefully constructed financial trap. My heart ached for my daughter, so blissfully unaware, so deeply in love with a man who saw her and her family as nothing more than a mark. The months that followed were a cold war fought with polite smiles and strained small talk. I kept my distance, armed with my secret knowledge, fending off Marcus's increasingly persistent, but still charming attempts to get me to invest. I made excuses. I told him my financial advisors were reviewing the deal, that my assets were tied up in other long-term projects. Each excuse was met with a new persuasive argument from him, a new layer of charm designed to wear down my resistance. He was like water, constantly seeking the smallest crack in my defenses. During this time, my relationship with Aaliyah remained fractured. She saw my reluctance to invest as a personal rejection of her husband, a confirmation of her belief that I simply didn't approve of him. Our conversations became brief and superficial, a painful dance around the one subject that truly mattered. I was caught in an impossible position to protect her. I had to endure her anger and disappointment, all while watching her fall deeper under the spell of a dangerous man. I felt a profound and terrible loneliness, a feeling I hadn't known since Robert passed away. Then came the invitation to the annual hospital charity gala, an event I had been sponsoring for over a decade. This year, Aaliyah and Marcus were co-chairing the event. It was their grand debut as a philanthropic power couple. I knew I had to go. To refuse would be to deepen the rift with my daughter and to raise Marcus's suspicions. It was on the night of the gala that everything changed. Marcus, ever the perfect husband, insisted on driving me. No arguments, Esther, he'd said with a winning smile. My 2 favorite girls should arrive in style. The style he was referring to was his new sports car, a low-slung, obscenely powerful machine that roared to life with an angry snarl. It was a car designed to scream one thing: look at me. The drive to the gala was a testament to his arrogance. He weaved through traffic, his speed far exceeding the limit, one hand on the wheel, the other holding his phone to his ear as he closed some supposedly urgent deal. I sat in the passenger seat, a silent, unwilling participant in his reckless display, my hands clenched in my lap. And then in my rearview mirror, I saw them, the flashing blue and red lights of a police car, closing in on us with a silent, deadly speed. The wail of the siren, when it finally came, was a shocking, intrusive sound that shattered the self-contained bubble of Marcus's luxury car. He cursed under his breath, a flash of genuine, ugly anger breaking through his polished facade. He pulled the car over to the side of the road with a sharp, aggressive jerk that sent my purse sliding off the leather seat. I watched in the side mirror as a police officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man, slowly approached the vehicle. His movements were deliberate, the calm, measured pace of a man who has done this 1,000 times before. Marcus was already working his magic, his anger replaced by an expression of charming, apologetic concern. He rolled down the window as the officer reached the driver's side. Officer, I am so terribly sorry, he began, his voice smooth as silk. I was just so excited to get my mother-in-law to her charity event. I guess I wasn't watching my speed. Completely my fault. The officer, whose name tag read Evans, did not smile. His face was a stern, unreadable mask. License and registration, sir, he said, his voice a deep, tired monotone. Marcus, with a flourish, handed over the documents. Officer Evans took them and shined his flashlight on the license. He looked at the name, Marcus Thorne, and then his gaze lifted, his eyes meeting mine in the passenger seat for a brief, flickering moment. In that moment I saw a subtle but undeniable shift in his expression. It was a flash of recognition, a flicker of something that looked like alarm. He held the license for a moment longer than necessary, his eyes scanning it again as if to confirm what he already knew. His whole demeanor changed. The bored, routine traffic cop was gone, replaced by someone with a new, urgent focus. Sir, I'm going to need you to stay in the vehicle, he said to Marcus, his voice now imbued with a new, hard authority. Then he looked at me. Mom, would you mind stepping out of the car for a moment, please? Marcus started to protest. Officer, is that really necessary? We're already late for. Sir, Please remain in the vehicle, Officer Evans repeated, his voice flat and non-negotiable. His eyes were on me, a silent command. My heart began to pound, a frantic nervous rhythm against my ribs. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew with a sudden chilling certainty that this was not a normal traffic stop. I opened the door and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder of the road. The air was cool against my face. Officer Evans walked around the back of the car and met me, leading me a few steps away from the vehicle, creating a small pocket of privacy. He stood with his back to Marcus, shielding our conversation from view. "Ma'am," he began, his voice now a low, urgent whisper. "I apologize for the alarm, but I need to ask you a few questions. Are you in this vehicle of your own free will?" I was stunned. "Of course," I said. "He's my son-in-law. We're on our way to a charity gala." The officer's eyes, filled with a weary, profound seriousness, searched my face. He seemed to be looking for something, some sign of fear or coercion. He was not just a cop, he was a protector, and his instincts were screaming at him. "Okay," he said, seeming to accept my answer though his expression remained tense. He knew he was on dangerous ground, crossing a professional boundary. But he had clearly made a decision that his duty to protect an innocent person outweighed the risk. It was then that he delivered the quiet, terrifying warning. The words that would change everything. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the passing traffic. "Don't go home with him. When you leave the event tonight, you call a cab. You call a friend. You call me if you have to. But you do not get back in that car. Find somewhere safe to go." The sheer raw urgency in his voice sent a wave of ice through my veins. This was not a suggestion. This was a command from a man who had seen a ghost on my son-in-law's driver's license. My mind was reeling, struggling to process the officer's terrifying cryptic warning. Before I could ask the thousand questions that were screaming in my mind, he made a subtle, almost imperceptible movement. As a pretense, he had asked for my ID when I stepped out of the car, a plausible request to verify my identity. Now, as he handed back my driver's license, his large, steady hand brushed against mine. In that fleeting moment of contact, I felt him press a small, tightly folded square of paper into my palm. It was a deft, practiced movement, the kind a spy might use in a movie. His eyes met mine, and he gave a short, almost invisible nod, a silent confirmation that this was not a mistake. "You have a good night, ma'am," he said, his voice returning to a formal, professional tone. "And please be careful." He turned, walked back to Marcus's window, and in the most anticlimactic end to the most terrifying encounter of my life, handed him a simple speeding ticket. "Just watch your speed, sir," he said, his voice once again the bored monotone of a traffic cop at the end of a long shift. Then he walked back to his patrol car and drove away, leaving me on the side of the road with a speeding ticket in my son-in-law's hand, a heart full of terror and a secret message clenched in my fist. The drive to the gala was a blur of surreal tension. Marcus was fuming, not with the fear of a man who has just been recognized by the police, but with the indignant rage of a wealthy man who has been inconvenienced. He complained loudly about the officer, about the city's budget, about the sheer audacity of being pulled over in a car like his. His arrogance was my shield. He was so wrapped up in his own wounded pride that he didn't notice my silence, didn't see the way my hands were trembling in my lap. I kept my hand clenched around the small piece of paper, the folded edges digging into my palm. It felt like a physical weight, a tiny object imbued with a terrible, unknown power. I waited, my entire body a coiled spring of anxiety for him to be distracted. The opportunity came when his phone rang, the car's speakers announcing a call from one of his business associates. As he launched into an animated, boastful conversation, I carefully, slowly began to work the note open in the privacy of my lap, my movements hidden by the deep shadows of the car's interior. The paper was thin and crisp, a piece torn from a policeman's notepad. I unfolded the last crease, my eyes straining to read the hastily scribbled words in the dim, flashing lights of the city. The note was not long, it contained no detailed explanation, no flowery prose. It was just a few terrifying, world-altering words, written in a blocky, masculine script. At the top in all caps were two words: Marcus Thorne, Federal RICO Investigation. My breath caught in my throat. I knew what RICO meant. I was a well-read, informed woman. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It was a law designed to prosecute not just crimes, but criminal enterprises. It was a word associated with the mafia, with organized crime, with the kind of deep systemic criminality that seemed to belong to a different, more violent world. Below that single devastating line was a case number and a name, FBI Special Agent Kincaid, followed by a phone number. I stared at the words, my mind struggling to connect them to the man sitting beside me, who was now laughing and joking on the phone. A picture of carefree success. My private investigator's report, with its warnings of shell corporations and money laundering, now clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. I had thought Marcus was a con artist, a garden-variety fraudster looking for an easy mark. I had been thinking on a scale that was laughably, tragically small. My son-in-law wasn't just a shady businessman, he was the target of a federal organized crime investigation. The danger was not just financial, it was real, it was immediate, and I was sitting right next to it. The charity gala, an event I had been looking forward to as a celebration of my daughter's hard work, now felt like a prison. The grand ballroom, with its glittering chandeliers and laughing, beautifully dressed people, seemed to mock me with its oblivious gaiety. I was walking through a dream, my body on autopilot, while my mind was a screaming chaos of RICO statutes and FBI agents. I had to get away from him. I had to get somewhere safe, just as the officer had warned. But how? To simply run would be to raise his suspicions. He was a predator, and the one thing a predator notices is when its prey begins to panic. I needed a reason, a plausible, logical reason to leave on my own. One that would make him angry, perhaps, but not suspicious. I needed a weapon, and in a moment of desperate clarity I realized I already had one. The truth, or at least a part of it. I found Marcus by the bar, schmoozing with a city councilman. I waited until the councilman had moved on. Then I approached him, my face a carefully constructed mask of cold disappointment. Marcus, I said, my voice firm. I need to speak with you. He turned, his charming smile already in place, but it faltered slightly when he saw the look on my face. Esther, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. In a way, I have, I said, my voice low. I've been doing some thinking since our last conversation about your investment. In fact, I had my own financial advisors, the ones who have managed my family's assets for 30 years, do their own due diligence on Viridian Horizons. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not fear but annoyance. He still believed he was in control, and, he asked, his tone a little too casual, and they have advised me in the strongest possible terms to stay away from it, I said, infusing my voice with the righteous anger of a woman who has been played for a fool. They described it as a house of cards. A hollow shell designed to lure in unsuspecting investors. I am not just disappointed, Marcus. I am deeply insulted that you would bring such a shoddy, unprofessional proposal to me, and that you would try to involve my daughter's family in such a risky scheme. The feigned argument worked better than I could have ever hoped. His face flushed with anger, his charm dissolving to reveal the arrogant, entitled man beneath. How dare you? He hissed, his voice a low snarl. You and your dusty old advisors wouldn't know a good opportunity if it hit you in the face. This is the big leagues, Esther. You're just too old and too scared to play. Perhaps, I said, my voice is cold as ice, but I am not too old to know when I am being lied to. I find I have lost my appetite for this evening's festivities. I will be leaving. Fine, he snapped. Leave. I'll be happy to take you home and be rid of you. No, thank you, I said, delivering the final crucial line. I wouldn't want to be an inconvenience. I have already called my own car. I turned before he could reply and walked away, my back straight, my head held high. I did not look back. I walked out of that ballroom, out of that world of lies and illusion, and into the cool, clean night air, a free woman, clutching a terrifying, life-saving secret in my hand. The drive home was a blur. I sat in the back of a black town car I had summoned, the city lights streaking past the window, but I saw none of it. My mind was consumed by the words on that small piece of paper. RICO investigation. The phrase echoed in my thoughts. A drumbeat of dread. When I arrived at the safety of my own home, I locked the doors, drew the curtains, and for the first time since the traffic stop, allowed myself to feel the full, paralyzing force of my fear. My daughter, my brilliant, compassionate, loving daughter, was married to a man involved in organized crime. She was sleeping next to a monster and had no idea. My first instinct was to call her, to scream a warning into the phone, to tell her to get out of that house immediately, but I stopped myself. What would I say? That a cop on the side of the road told me her husband was a criminal? She would never believe it. She would think I was hysterical, that I was using this as a weapon in my petty disapproval of her husband. She would call Marcus. He would charm her with a plausible lie, and I would have not only failed to save her but I would have also alerted the monster that I was onto him. No, I had to be smarter than that. I had to be colder, more calculated. I had to be the engineer my husband had raised me to be. I needed a foundation of irrefutable facts before I could even think of approaching my daughter. I took out the folded note from my purse and smoothed it on my desk. FBI Special Agent Kincaid. A phone number. I stared at it for a long time, the simple digits representing a terrifying unknown world. Making that call felt like stepping off a cliff. But the alternative, to do nothing, to leave my daughter in the dark, was once. My hand was shaking as I picked up the phone and dialed the number. I expected a machine, a labyrinth of automated menus. But a man answered on the second ring, his voice sharp, alert, and all business. Kincaid. My name is Esther Davenport, I said, my own voice sounding thin and reedy to my ears. I was given your name and number by a police officer tonight. He told me to call you. It's about a man named Marcus Thorne. There was a moment of charged silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the agent sitting up straighter, his professional interest sharpening to a fine point. Ma'am, he said, his voice now carefully neutral. Can you tell me your relationship to Mr. Thorne? He is my son-in-law, I said, the words tasting like poison, and he has been trying to get me to invest $5 million into an offshore real estate company called Viridian Horizons. The silence on the other end was even more profound this time. I had just, without knowing it, handed him the missing piece of his puzzle. I had given him the bait for a trap he had likely been trying to set for years. Mrs. Davenport, Agent Kincaid said, his voice now imbued with a new serious gravity. It is very, very good that you called me. We need to talk. Would you be willing to meet with me tomorrow morning? I'll be there, I said, my voice a little stronger now, a little surer. I was no longer just a frightened old woman. I was a witness. I was an asset. And I was about to become the last person in the world Marcus Thorne should have ever tried to cross. The next morning I met with Agent Kincaid and his partner in a sterile, anonymous conference room in a federal building downtown. The two FBI agents were a study in contrasts. Kincaid was older, a seasoned veteran with weary eyes that had seen too much. His partner was younger, sharp, and radiated a restless energy. They listened with an intense, unwavering focus as I told them everything. I told them about Marcus's charm, about his flashy lifestyle, about the rift he had created between my daughter and me. I told them about the Viridian Horizons proposal, and I gave them the copy of the prospectus Marcus had left with me. I also gave them the name and number of my private investigator, Arthur Vance. As they looked through the glossy, deceptive pages of the brochure, I could see a look of grim satisfaction on their faces. This is it, the younger agent said, tapping a finger on the page detailing the offshore corporate structure. This is the laundry. We've been tracking their network for years, but we've never been able to get inside a live solicitation. This is our golden ticket. Agent Kincaid explained the situation to me in stark, terrifying detail. Marcus Thorne was not a small-time con artist, he was a key player in a massive international money laundering syndicate. That was when they made their proposal. The one I knew was coming. They wanted me to be the bait. They wanted me to re-engage with Marcus, to pretend I was reconsidering his investment offer. They wanted to stage a sting operation to catch him in the act of accepting my money, an act that would be the final, undeniable piece of evidence they needed to bring down not just him but his entire network. My every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to run away and hide, to grab my daughter and disappear. But I looked at the faces of the two agents, at the grim determination in their eyes, and I thought of Aaliyah sleeping peacefully next to a monster, and I knew I had no choice. This was not just about justice anymore. This was about saving my daughter's life. If I played the victim and ran, he would eventually find another way to use her, to entangle her in his web of crime. But if I played the predator, if I helped them trap him, I could cut him out of her life like a cancer. What do you need me to do? I asked, my voice steady, the voice of an engineer who has just been given the most important blueprint of her life. The plan the FBI devised was simple in its concept but terrifying in its execution. I was to call Marcus and, using the argument we'd had at the gala as a pretext, I was to apologize. I was to tell him that I had been emotional, that I had spoken to Aaliyah, and that I didn't want this business disagreement to permanently damage our family. I was to tell him that I had reconsidered, and I was now willing to make the investment. The phone call was the hardest performance of my life. I rehearsed my lines with Agent Kincaid until the words felt natural, until the feigned apology sounded genuine. I made the call from my own home, the line being secretly monitored by an FBI surveillance team parked in a van down the street. Marcus answered, his voice cool and distant. He was still angry from our confrontation. I delivered my lines, my heart pounding against my ribs. I told him I was sorry, that I had been old-fashioned and stubborn. I could hear the shift in his tone, from cold anger to a triumphant, predatory satisfaction. He thought he had won, that his charm and persistence had finally broken through my senile resistance. "I knew you'd come around, Esther," he said, his voice once again the smooth, charming purr of the man my daughter had married. "I told Aaliyah you just needed some time to see the bigger picture." He was gloating and I let him. We agreed to meet the following day at my private bank, a small, discreet institution where I had managed my personal wealth for decades. I was to authorize the wire transfer of the $5 million directly to the Viridian Horizons account. The meeting was set for 11. That morning I dressed with a care I hadn't taken in years. I wore a tailored wool suit, my grandmother's pearls, and a look of quiet, unshakable resolve. I was not a victim being led to a slaughter. I was a queen, and I was about to checkmate a king. The bank was a masterpiece of covert operations. The friendly, familiar bank manager who greeted me was actually a senior FBI agent. The tellers behind the counter, the security guard by the door, even a few of the other customers milling about were all undercover federal agents. I was escorted to a private conference room to await Marcus's arrival. The room was bugged with a half-dozen hidden microphones and cameras. Agent Kincaid was in a surveillance van across the street, watching and listening to everything. When Marcus arrived, he was a vision of success, dressed in a flawless pinstripe suit, his smile wide and confident. He believed he was moments away from the biggest payday of his life. He sat across from me at the polished conference table, the wire transfer documents spread between us. He was charming, he was gracious, he was the perfect son-in-law. "I'm so glad we're doing this, Esther," he said, his voice filled with false sincerity. "This is going to be the beginning of a whole new era for our family." I simply nodded and picked up the pen. With my hand steady, I signed my name on the authorization line, the final piece of the trap clicking into place. The moment the pen lifted from the paper, the door to the conference room opened. Agent Kincaid and two other agents stepped inside, their badges displayed. "Marcus Thorne," Kincaid said, his voice calm and authoritative. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy and racketeering." The look on Marcus's face, the look of a man whose entire world has just evaporated into thin air, is a look I will never forget. The epilogue to this story is not one of triumph, but of quiet, painful rebuilding. The arrest of Marcus Thorne sent shockwaves through the city. A sensational story of a high-flying financial guru revealed to be a high-level organized criminal. His network was dismantled, his assets were seized, and he is now facing a prison sentence that will likely last for the rest of his life. But I took no joy in his downfall. My focus, my entire world, narrowed to one person, my daughter. The revelation of her husband's true identity shattered Aaliyah's world. Her grief was a profound, silent thing, a period of deep shock and disbelief, followed by a wave of shame and self-recrimination. She felt like a fool, and her heart was broken. I did not say "I told you so." I did not lecture her on her blindness, or her naivete. I simply became what she needed me to be. Her mother. I moved into her cold magazine-perfect house for a month. I cooked for her. I sat with her in the long, silent evenings. I listened when she wanted to talk, and I sat in comfortable silence when she didn't. I held her when she cried, and I gently, patiently, helped her to distinguish the man she had loved from the monster he had pretended to be. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to pick up the pieces. Aaliyah threw herself into her work at the hospital, finding solace in the healing of others. We started having our own quiet dinners, not in her cold, formal dining room, but in the cozy breakfast nook, just the two of us. We talked, really talked. For the first time in years, I told her about her father, about the quiet, steady principles upon which he had built our lives. I told her about my own work, my own investments, revealing a side of myself she had never known, a side of strength and shrewdness that was not at odds with my role as her mother, but was in fact an essential part of it. The rift that Marcus had created between us began to heal, replaced by a new, deeper understanding, a bond forged not in the easy sunlight of happiness, but in the difficult, shared darkness of a great sorrow. My true victory was not seeing Marcus Thorne in handcuffs. It was not in the grim satisfaction of a federal conviction. It was in the quiet moments, months later, sitting with my daughter in my own familiar living room, watching her laugh, a real genuine laugh, for the first time since her world had fallen apart. It was in that moment that I knew I had saved her. My quiet, watchful love had been a stronger fortress than any of his lies, and in the end, it was the only thing that truly mattered. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.